Welcome back to Jeff. My name is Freed from the Real. You know, I get asked so many times what my favorite Final Fantasy games are. So I figured I should do something that's totally still relevant and not a thing of a couple years ago, and do a tier list. Obviously, this is just my opinion. If you disagree with anything I'm about to say, it's totally fine. You should just get some taste. Alright, let's do this. We'll start with the original Final Fantasy. My initial gut reaction tells me solid C tier. It's a decent game, and it saved Square and Sakaguchi, but it's pretty dated nowadays and not the most enjoyable to play through, for me at least. I think high C bordering on B is fine. Final Fantasy II, we'll just go ahead and put this right here in the D tier. It was the first game to use a lot of what would become staples for the series. However, that leveling system I just don't like. I can't stand it. I haven't played it in a few years, so maybe I like it more now, but yeah, I don't particularly like this game. The difficulty is pretty inconsistent too. One minute you're fine, and then the next minute you walk outside in the wrong area and you're just wiped. So I think I'm putting it in D tier for me. Final Fantasy III was not released in the US until it got a Nintendo DS port, so I didn't play it until I was a teenager. It's a fine game. I like it a bit. It's more refined than the first game, and it doesn't have the awful leveling system of the second one, so I'm going to put it right here in the C tier. Final Fantasy IV. Now this is where it starts to get good. The first cast of characters that actually feel like a cast of characters to me, and not just Crystal Guardian placeholders. I like the music in the game a lot. The gameplay is really good. It's just a lot of fun. It's a classic game for me. I love it. I'm thinking high B tier. High B tier, bordering on A tier. Final Fantasy V is an interesting one. Again, it's more of a refined version to the formula of 1 and 3, but I feel like narratively it's a step back from 4. The music is okay. It's not remarkable really to me. I don't think it's as strong as an offering as Final Fantasy IV overall, so I can't put it above 4. I'm gonna put it right here. Final Fantasy VI. This is an easy S tier. Every aspect of this game is great. The score is one of the best of Uematsu's career. The characters are enjoyable. Terra, Locke, Cyan, I love them all. They're just wonderful. The story's memorable. Kefka's a great villain. And the gameplay is just classic JRPG goodness. Phenomenal game, S tier. Final Fantasy VII. This one is the elephant in the room. You either think it's the greatest game ever made, or you think it's vastly overrated. I feel like a lot of people hate on this game because it was so successful and it was so popular, and it kind of became a meme. It's like the Nickelback of video games, really. It's not as bad as people want to make it out to be, but I feel like they hate on it just to be cool sometimes. Personally, I think it's hard to look at Final Fantasy games objectively and not put 7 at least somewhere near the very top. The 3D polygons have aged worse than the 2D sprites, yeah, but man, this game is so damn good. My personal favorite score from the series. I love the atmosphere of the game, especially like in the beginning when you're in Midgar. Everything's so dark and dreary and gloomy. I'm a big fan of dystopian settings, so this is right up my alley. I have to put this at the very top. I know you're saying, Jeff, how can it be number one? It doesn't have Final Fantasy XV's real-time combat. But I'm sorry, I gotta put it at the top. Final Fantasy VIII is definitely one of the most divisive entries in the series. How do you follow up the massive success of Final Fantasy VII? Well, apparently you decide to go in a completely different direction tonally. The game has a lot of flaws. The junction system is broken. The plot can be a little messy at times. And the cast I find is generally weaker than the previous few entries. That being said, there are things I like about the game a whole lot. I like the score. I think it's one of Uematsu's more underrated ones. It's still good and it's still talked about, but not as much as like 6 or 7. And I feel like it's right up there with those. Let's see. I'm thinking A tier. I like Squall as a character. I know a lot of people don't because he's really moody and introspective or whatever, but I like Squall. I like the card game. It's a lot of fun. I like the idea of a time-traveling sorceress. I know the orphanage twist is really cliche and but I can't help but like this game a whole lot, so I'm putting it in the A tier. Final Fantasy IX, being the last of the Final Fantasies on the PlayStation 1, as you might expect, is a lot better looking graphically than the previous two. I think the gameplay itself is fantastic, maybe the best of the bunch. This might be my first hot take of the video, but I'm thinking I'm gonna put it behind 8. You know, there are a lot of things I like about it. I like learning skills from equipment. I like like having a fourth person in combat. I like that dynamic. The combat itself is very good. It's very fun. But I'm a big soundtrack guy, and 9, for whatever reason, wasn't quite as remarkable as the previous few for me. It's still got its high points, but overall, it's just not quite on that level to me. I don't like Kuja. I mean, he's okay, but once you go from like Kefka and Sephiroth and then this time-traveling sorceress, Kuja just seems kind of lackluster to me. And it's really lighthearted, which is fine and a good thing to some people. And I definitely enjoy that aspect of it sometimes, but at other times, I'm more of a dark and broody kind of guy, so I think that's probably why it's just a little below on my list of where a lot of people keep it. Final Fantasy X, the first in the series to have voice acting, and I can already hear all of the dumbass people quoting Tidus's laugh scene. Every time I play through this game, I'm reminded of how much I love it. I love the score, the last one to be worked on by Uematsu exclusively. It's one of my favorites. To Zanarkand is one of my favorite tracks. I like all the characters in the game, even Tidus. And I love the setting of Spira. I like the lore. I like how Albad are kind of like this marginalized society, and there's these forbidden machina and things like that. I think it's all pretty interesting to me. So I'm gonna go S tier behind 6. I love this game a lot, and it's a very special place in my heart. 10-2, I won't spend a whole lot of time on. I think it's okay. The best thing I can say about it is that it's fun. It's relatively fun to play, and it gives us more time in Spira. So it was unnecessary, really, and it was overall kind of But yeah, I don't think it's going to top many people's tier lists. But you know, it was fun messing around with all the different combinations of jobs that you could have, and just seeing how things had changed since the original game. It's not bad, and I would actually replay this game. I haven't played through it in quite a few years, but I do want to replay through it, so I'm gonna go low B tier. Final Fantasy XI, first MMO in the series, and I have some fond memories of playing this with a few friends. I'm sure there is a plot to the game, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. For me, it was all about running around in this massive world and trying not to get aggroed and killed by these crazy monsters. I think it's a fine MMO. It's still going today, and it's quite a bit dated, honestly. But yeah, it's not on the level of like World of Warcraft, but I think it's still pretty fun. I'm gonna go B tier, maybe low B. Yeah. Next up, we have Final Fantasy XII, another sore spot for me. I don't like the combat system at all in 12. I don't like not having to play the game. I know you have to issue commands and stuff, and things change in battle. But the game, I just find it kind of boring in combat. And I know that's kind of weird because a lot of Final Fantasy turn-based combat is just hit X, attack, attack, move down, use a skill. But I don't know, I really like that aspect of it. I like having to decide something every turn. And with 12, excuse me, you don't really have to do anything. You can set gambits and just watch your guys fight, and that's just not my cup of tea. There are things I like about the game. I like the setting. I like Evilis. The artwork is great. Some of the characters are likable and memorable, but some are kind of flat for me. The soundtrack is okay. I'm a big Uematsu guy, so it's kind of you know. Even if it has good points, I'm still a little bitter and petty about it because I like Uematsu so much. I think it's middle of the pack for me. It's okay. I like the bounties, like the hunts and stuff that you can do. I think those are really cool. But yeah, I just don't like playing through the game, and that's kind of like the biggest detriment to it. So I'm going with B tier, I believe. Final Fantasy XIII, everyone's favorite. I'll come right out and say it, I don't like this game. I didn't get very far in it. I just couldn't get past how linear it was. I know at this point everyone knows that it's a hallway. You can't go left, you can't go right, you can only go forward. I don't understand why they did that. It's such a puzzling design choice for me. Like Final Fantasy X, for example, was similarly linear in that you had a start location you could go to, but it did a good job of making you feel like you could deviate from the path if you wanted to, although you really couldn't. At least until you get like the airship at the end, and even then it's just choosing coordinates. But 13 is just right there and open with you. You can't go anywhere except forward. And also, we're going to play the game for you. That's an option. You don't even have to play the game, which is great, because I don't want to play the game. I couldn't tell you any of the characters other than Lightning, which is a stupid-ass name. I don't know the plot. I don't know the soundtrack. I don't know much about it, which maybe should disqualify my opinion, but I just don't like it, so putting it right here at the end of D tier. Final Fantasy XIV, the second MMO, and this one's currently going strong. It's definitely more polished than 11, and I think it's a pretty fun MMO. It actually can rival World of Warcraft, whereas 11 really couldn't. I haven't played the last couple of expansions, which are supposedly really good. and that might increase my opinion of it. I do plan on playing those, but I just haven't yet. I'm not a big MMO guy. It's hard for me to sink enough time into it. But I think the game looks good and it sounds good and it's fun to play. So I'm thinking solid A tier after 9. Okay, Final Fantasy Bromance 15. Jesus, what an odd game this is. There were aspects I appreciated. You best believe I was cruising around with my homies listening to Aerith's theme on the radio. I mostly just pressed the attack button through combat over and over and over, and it was good enough to get through the game. So, even though this is a real-time combat game where you can run around and do all this cool stuff, I found myself just pressing X continuously more than I did when I was playing through like a classic old-school turn-based battle system. I don't know why Square is so adamant about doing away with that old system. I mean, I know that some people find it boring, but at the same time, obviously you have so many fans of the series who love that old style. Like, why are you so quick to get rid of this or change something? Sometimes moving forward and progressing is actually taking a step backwards. I mean, look at a game like Persona 5. You know, it shows us that you can come out with a modern game that still has turn-based combat and it can be excellent. I think Persona 5's combat is way better than Final Fantasy XV's. I think that they should go back and at least try it again. Why give us all this real-time stuff if it's just not very fun or necessary? You can dodge a million times in Final Fantasy XV, but at the same time, you're probably better off just spamming the attack button. So what's the point? It's true that going back to that old style or using turn-based combat will turn off some people, but it's also true that if your game just sucks and isn't fun to play, it's going to turn off a lot of people too. That being said, I'm thinking C tier. It's better than 3 and maybe 1. I've maybe behind 1. So this is where the list ended technically, but I want to go ahead and add Final Fantasy Tactics to mine because I love the game a lot. I would put it firmly at the end of S tier, right here behind Final Fantasy X. I love strategy games, I love role-playing games, I love weird religious, political, Machiavellian plot lines. I just think Tactics has such high replayability and it's so enjoyable that it's one of the best games for me in the series. I love it. So that was my official Final Fantasy tier list. Do you disagree? Do you agree? Let me know what you think. I don't really know how to end this video, so I'll just